Chapter 31. "You know, I've never even been in jail before," Ben said with a scowl on his face. "I've never even been close to being sent to jail before. Sure, I used to clean jail cells for bioscrub, but that's not the same thing." "Yes, Ben," Ghost Ear said, his eyes closed, leaning his extremely tiny body against the hard, cold, chitinous wall. "Now I'm in jail. He placed special emphasis on who was in jail. "In jail! This entire world sucks, no offense, Ghost Ears." "None taken. Your world sounds like a paradise," Ghost Ears said, sounding like he was only half in the conversation. "I mean, I saw my own dead body back there, man. That was like... Fuck!" Ben shouted, running a magical hand through his magical hair. The tactile feeling of his own body completely freaked him out. It was dry and smooth like silk, or smooth like two magnetic fields pressing against one another. Bouncy and completely without any moisture of any kind. "I can't stand this," Ben said, making a face and trying not to press any part of his body against any other part. Sitting felt completely bizarre. "I can't believe he had you executed like that," Ghost Ear said. "I thought for sure he would at least allow you to have some final words." "I know!" Ben said, trying to ignore how fucking weird his ass felt. "My class is telling me that was a major no-no, and that now I've got a royal vendetta against him, both for not executing me properly and for botching my execution. Apparently they're both major insults, and I get a substantial buff applied to all my actions against him." "He didn't even wait for you to stop walking. Just as soon as you got close, he ran down and just..." Ghost Ear's eyes went wide, and he blew out his cheeks. "That was terrifying." "If you say so. It happened so fast, I didn't even have a chance to be scared." "Still," Ghost Ear said, doing his best not to stare at Ben. "It's fortunate you are magical. I had no idea. I've never heard of anyone other than Sunlets having it. Are you sure your entire race has it?" "Apparently we got it in exchange for not being able to poop," Ben said, casually misrepresenting the truth while remembering the nightmare sensation of the Citadel fly's arm as it tore into his stomach, up through his diaphragm, and ripped out his heart. "Yeah, gross, Ben. Stop thinking about that." Ben had been spaced out, reliving his recent death, so he completely missed the rare look of disbelief and outrage that graced Ghost Ear's true elf fairy face. It was a classic, the whole "you got the ability to survive dying in exchange for not being able to poop" expression that was just all the rage in the system office these days. "So what exactly does this perk do again?" Ben asked. "No idea," Ghost Ear said, now ignoring Ben and pondering if there was an inherent fairness to the universe or not. "Ask Vivi." Ben, surprisingly, took the hint and leaned back against the wall, then jumped away when his entirely too smooth and frictionless skin pressed against it. He felt like he was covered in soap, and everything was made of smooth plastic. He wasn't slipping around, but every human instinct he had told him he ought to be. Ben remembered dying. How could he forget? It hadn't even hurt because he'd died so fast he never had a chance. He remembered falling on the ground and being unable to move. The Citadel fly had eaten his heart. Then, with Ben's lifeblood running down his body, he'd ordered the execution of the entire group. The tyrant had been speaking English, albeit with a heavy buzz accent. Ben had laid there and thought, "Oh shit, I'm dead," and watched as the army of insects slowly menaced their way towards the party, who had formed a defensive ring around his body. Ben would never forget that little detail. They'd tried to guard his body. Not because they knew he was coming back, but Ben hoped he loved them as much as they loved him. He'd never forget the sounds they'd made when he died. He didn't want to remember, but he'd never forget. So he'd been laying there, his eyes open, watching the touching scene, expecting the blackness to come and take him. Then he distinctly remembered thinking, "This is really taking a while." And then he'd moved something. It had surprised him because he was dead, but he just clenched his foot. Ben started wiggling and then, like a man escaping from under a pile of about 100 soaking wet towels, pulled himself out of his dead body. For some reason, Don't Fear the Reaper by the Blue Oyster Cult played when he emerged, which was sort of cool but also really awkward. It had put an end to the fighting, that was for sure. The Citadel Fly had charged Ben and attacked, but his attacks just passed right through Ben's new magical body and did no apparent damage. Ben could attest to the fact that the strikes were merely uncomfortable but not painful. It had gazed at him with malevolent red compound eyes, then turned around briskly, its wings fanning out like a cape as it pivoted, walking back to his throne. He sat and then said only 2 words. "Imprison them." And imprisoned they were. Ben had, for a few glorious seconds, thought he was invincible, and had been fully prepared to go apeshit crazy and burn the entire Citadel to the ground. It's worth noting that in his new form, his mana pool, regeneration, and density had all drastically increased, which made sense, seeing as how he was now a being of pure magic, a magical being, freed from his fleshy prison. Ben had been prepared to beat everyone, but quickly learned he was only immune to conventional weaponry and that magic could and would hurt him just fine. He had been menaced into his jail cell by spider centaurs armed with magic staves tipped with burning white light. Ben rubbed his side, then flinched away from the contact. "So weird," he said. Then became aware of his tongue moving around his completely dry, frictionless mouth and felt like puking. He wasn't producing saliva, he realized, and spent about a minute straight moving his tongue around, trying to get some to come out of that little gland under his tongue. "Are you all right, Prince Ben?" Ghost Ears asked. He'd been watching Ben uncomfortably move around for a little while now, but when he saw Ben working his jaw and making all sorts of weird faces, he was no longer able to keep silent. "Yeah," Ben said, then stopped messing around and started looking at their prison. The cell they were in was, surprise, surprise, made of the same black chitin as the rest of the walls of the Citadel. It was smooth and dry, but managed to look a little oily, the way certain gross insects looked oily even if they weren't. "Well," Ben continued, "be honest with me, I can take it. Do I suck at fighting?" Ghost Ears' silence was deafening. Ben sighed. "That's what I thought." I should mention that it wasn't quiet in their cell, not even close. The Citadel of Horrors buzzed with activity. It sat on the forest floor like a skyscraper-sized wasp nest. From the brief time he'd walked through it, Ben realized something. They'd never stood a chance. "I'm such a fucking idiot," the prince said, hanging his head. "I'm starting to realize that myself," Ghost Ear said, and Ben's head shot up, his eyes hurt. Then he saw the smirk on the true elf fairy's face. "You're a fucking asshole," Ben said, smiling and shaking his head. "And you're 29, Ghost Ears countered, "and I'm nearly 300 years old," he said, then paused for significance. "A young man, for my kind." Ben gave him the stink eye. So? "So, how are you supposed to know that Anna's suggestion was a terrible idea? I've been following your lead because, well, you've got an Aeon slug working for you. You've got that giant man-shark as a friend. That frightening woman with the antlers has practically sworn her soul to you. You have the appearance of competence, Ben, but I think it's just an appearance. I think, under that crown, you're a baby who's been in my world for less than a week, and you just died for your ignorance. Worse, so much worse, Vivi is also a child, practically speaking. The shark, I can tell he's just as ignorant as you. The demon, or whatever she is more ignorant than all of you. A terrifying thought. A truly terrifying thought. Ben was many things. He knew when to keep his fucking mouth shut when someone else was talking, no matter how much he'd like to object and defend himself. Babies, each and every one of you. That Anna and her party? I should have said something. They looked and acted too young. All confidence and no fear of death. A fast way to die in the Overcavern Forest. I doubt she's been adventuring for more than a year, and I doubt she's done anything remotely dangerous. I see them sometimes, when I go to the edge of the forest. The young adventurers. Not Anna and her party, Ghost Ears continued. And Ben realized he'd never heard this guy really talk before now. Go on, Ben said, scooting forward a bit to hear the tiny man speak. They fall into two types. The parties with members of the signatory races, and the parties without them. The ones without the young, rich, powerful, well-protected sunlets, well, they die more often. But they're serious about what they're doing. They take on risky, dangerous jobs and succeed as much as they fail. The other groups, I'd be lucky to see them clear out the nest of a juvenile shelled lurker. They're usually armed to the teeth and surrounded by their friends, who are also armed to the teeth. Anna's group didn't have anything, Ben commented. No. They came out here apparently unarmed. I thought they must be competent, or strong, or have skills or something. But it turns out they were just extremely stupid. Ghost Ears delivered his verdict without passion or ill will. Just a man delivering the news. I think she must have sold all their equipment to afford that ridiculous cell phone you stole. Excellent move, by the way, Ghost Ear said, fixing Ben with twinkling eyes. Should we get out of this, don't give it back. Demand it as payment. That would be quite funny. No, I should have put a stop to this as soon as it started. We should have gone straight to Solas. But I was too enamored by the invincibility of the Pocket of Sanctuary. There are places in this forest we could have gone. We should have gone. But I kept my mouth shut. That was my sin. You are a 29-year-old baby. I let this happen and didn't say a word. You should be in charge, Ben said, nodding his head and sighing. You're the oldest, and you know this world better than any of us except Vivi, and he's never going to be in charge. No, Lord Vivi excels at many things, and leadership is not one of them. It is, however, something I have great experience with. Practically since the day I was born, and showed even the slightest interest in taking responsibility was piled onto me till I collapsed, and then it buried me. Then I rose to meet the challenge. First I was a village chief, and then I was a town leader. Strangetown was my dream. My dream, he repeated. And do you know why it was a dream for me? What I wanted so badly? Ben shook his head. I wanted to not be in charge anymore. I wanted to live somewhere where I could relax a little bit, somewhere I didn't have to worry so much. Let someone else make the decisions and be confident that they were making the best decisions. I wanted to be one of the ones in the crowd hurling insults rather than being the one insulted. I wanted to be important enough to matter, but not so important that everything was my fault. Ghost Ears laughed. And it was such an honest laugh, so incredibly humble. I never even knew it till right now, Ben. I didn't know any of that until you said I ought to be in charge, and all I could think was, I'd rather die, and it wasn't even surprising. No. I think I'll just train you to be in charge, let you deal with all the problems. Who knows? You might even get better at it than I was. By the forest, but I hope so. I gave Strangetown everything I had, and it all fell apart right at the end." Ben looked at Ghost Ears, feeling a warmth in his chest that spread and burned in a good way. "So, Prince Ben, how was that for a job interview?" he said. The extremely tiny man had a confident, no-fucks-given grin on his face. Ben felt he was seeing the real Ghost Ears, and that it was a sight very few ever had. "You are so fucking hired," Ben said. "And thank God, because I have no idea what I'm doing." "Sure you do," Ghost Ears said, sounding a little lazy. "What needs to get done right now?" "We need to get out of this cell," Ben said. "We need to find Short Bus, Vivi, and Red," he continued. "Possibly Anna and her group as well, but I don't know about that. They kind of suck. Then we need to get out of here, just cut our losses and leave." "But first, we need to get out of this cell," Ghost Ears said, looking at Ben like he was expecting him to have an answer. "Why do you think I would know how to get out of here?" Ben asked, feeling a flash of irritation. "Because you're in charge, Prince Ben," Ghost Ears said, and it was plain to see how much he enjoyed not being in charge any longer. "Shit," Ben said. "Can you pick the lock? You know, like, lockpick it?" "No, it's a dungeon lock. Only a silver key or someone with the appropriate skills can get it open. If you'll remember 30... Ghost Ears had been about to point out that the cyborg from Anna's coin purse was a rogue, and that Ben could probably coordinate with him and develop a plan. But Ben interrupted him. "Of course," Ben said. And a silver key, with a stylized Aeon slug eye at the handle, appeared in his hand in a black flash. Engraved on the key was the number 2. He walked over to the door, and as soon as he got close with the silver key, a silver lock appeared. The lock was shaped like an angry fly's face. "Where did you get that?" Ghost Ears asked, a frown on his face. "Vivi's dungeon," Ben said, as he looked at the key and shut his eyes, saying a silent prayer to RN Jesus. "I used a lottery perk ticket and got an ability called Key Keeper. It gives me a chance to keep silver keys that I use." "Well, I'm officially jealous," Ghost Ears said. "Let me guess, you got one of the most sought-after dungeon perks on your first try, right?" No," Ben lied, but he was having trouble remembering, so he didn't internally classify it as a lie. "People risk their lives on those dangerous fucking tickets." He took a deep breath. "Sure, right, that's fine, okay, moving on," Ghost Ears said. "But before you..." Ben put the key in the lock and turned it. "Open the door, we should come up with a plan," Ghost Ears finished, then sighed. The lock dissolved, and a voice called out, like a game show announcer, "Key Keeper!" "Yes," Ben said. "Old Lucky strikes again." He looked down fondly at the key, which now had the number 3 engraved on it. Ben kissed the key and put it away in his utility pouch. "What now? Quickly, before the guards come back," Ghost Ears asked, jumping into the air and flying near Ben's head. "Simple. We go free 31 because he's a rogue, and have him bust out the rest of the group. In order, I want Short Bus, so he can tank while we work. Then Red, so she can keep us healed up. Then Vivi, because he can bring the pain. After that, Drist, because he's really cool to look at, even if he is useless and a little stuck up. Anna's last, because this was all her stupid idea anyways, even if it's all my fault we're here." "That was fast," Ghost Ears commented. "There's really not a whole lot of time right now for sitting around and wondering if I'm making the right decisions or not," Ben said, silently hopping up and down so he could look through the bars at the top of the door. The way he moved was fluid and perfect, his kinetic leap ability on full display. "See if you can get through here now that it's unlocked," Ben said. landing silently and steadying himself even though he hadn't been in danger of slipping. "This fucking body is slippery, I swear it," Ben muttered to himself. Ghost Ears had, naturally and obviously, tried to get through the gaps in the top of the door when they'd first been imprisoned. The gaps had been protected by some sort of force field, but now that the door was unlocked, the true elf fairy was able to silently and stealthily get through. Ben waited, his heart pounding in his chest. "Jailbreak," he said under his breath. "I'm in the middle of a jailbreak. Just have a damn adventure. This is so fucking cool," he asserted, trying to convince himself, trying to psych himself up. "This is just like Shawshank Redemption. Wait, no. Hopefully this goes better than Shawshank. That took a really long time. Poor Andy. Well, I did already get my heart ripped out, so I guess that's sort of like getting prison rape." Ben shook his head and slapped his face a few times. "I've been slapping myself too much lately," he continued. "Just gotta keep it together. Just gotta get out of here. Get 100,000 points in the pocket of Sanctuary, get the map of Wish, get to Solas, prove Vivi's innocence, go back to this fucking devil of a forest and kill those fucking devil Ewoks, gather up the forest fairies, and start a new kingdom with the map of Wish. Also, at some point, go back and loot the reliquary in Vivi's dungeon, which hopefully won't be empty." When Ben said it all out loud, it really helped him feel much more stressed and under pressure than he'd felt moments ago. Fuck wish rehearsal. What am I going to wish for with the map of Wish? How about, I wish for a pre-made kingdom full of treasure and legendary buildings and genius infrastructure and a free ethical labor pool that's mysteriously empty, and all I have to do is walk in and take it and it's mine, and all the progression is laid out so even a child could rebuild the place to legendary heights without a whole lot of effort, but just enough to be satisfying and not embarrassing. Ben said it all in one breath. "Yeah, that's cool. Then I've just got to get there, build a kingdom, defend it from monsters and invading armies, and build diplomatic relationships and actually get people to come live there and..." Ben was normally a lot better at self-soothing behavior. "Shit, forget about all that. Just gotta get out of here alive. Fuck being royalty. Being alive is better. Here's the plan. Stay alive, steal everything, give nothing back." Ben nodded, and immediately set about his cell, looking for anything he could pocket. He started probing along the walls with his fingers, feeling the ridges and trying to pry them up. "Okay, new addition to the plan," he said, realizing he wasn't getting anything out of his jail cell. "Stay alive, fuck royals, steal everything, give nothing back, and obtain a hammer and chisel as soon as possible. Yeah!" he said, dreaming of the day when he could steal even the things that were bolted down. "Hammer and chisel, and a pry bar," he said, and suddenly it was like he was a laborer again. "And some power tools. A drill, definitely, a sawzall, a circular saw, a breaker bar, wrenches, big pipe wrenches, a welding torch. Fucking love those things," Ben said, now basically just remembering all the tools that had been on his old work truck. "A good shovel, flathead, and spade. Shame I don't have a vector. Fuck! I bet I don't even need one!" Ben at that point realized his utility pocket could be used to dig holes by blasting the ground with water and then sucking up the mud and debris without much cost to himself, and the thought made him absurdly happy. He needed a win. Even if that win was realizing he could do the job of a $500,000 piece of heavy equipment that was completely obsolete in his new world. What else was obsolete? He definitely needed a drill, right? Ben thought about it. All a drill really was something that spun a drill bit, and he couldn't. Could he? "Oh my God," Ben said. "Do I even..." He stopped talking and made a utility pocket, a very small one. Then he pushed a stick halfway out of it. "Moment of truth," he said. And with an effort of will, made the stick spin. It cost basically nothing, mana-wise, so Ben started to make it spin faster. Then faster. Then faster. There started to be a mana cost that he could feel, so Ben attached the utility pocket to his finger and felt the cost dramatically decrease. The stick spun so fast that it started to break apart from the centrifugal force it was being subjected to, pieces of bark flying off. "That's," Ben said, watching as he spun the stick as fast as it would go, and then he turned his head away and gave the utility pocket a massive surge of mana. There was a ripping sound, and splinters of wood flew everywhere as the stick was pushed well past its limit. Ben stopped the spinning and examined what was left. Just a tiny, thin, wire-sized bit of wood, wet and steaming from the forces it had just been subjected to. It started to droop, then broke under its own weight. "That barely cost anything," Ben said, a frown on his face, his eyes wide. "That barely cost anything, and I could have spun that even faster," he said, the realization of what his utility pocket was and what it could really do settling into his mind. The Tao of Ben. The basis of all technology and magic is the ability to spin in a circle. The utility pocket was, quite possibly, the most advanced object in the known universe when it came to spinning things in a circle. Frankie, who was anxiously monitoring Ben's soul, felt the Tao descend and latched onto it, letting its truth suffuse him and merge with his own knowledge of spatial manipulation. Ben produced another stick, this time making it move in and out like a sawzall blade. As long as it was attached to his body, it was basically free. Then, using a slightly round paint chip, Ben spun it like a circular saw blade successfully. The more he experimented, the more excited he got. "This is the ultimate power tool! I'm the ultimate power tool!" That was, of course, the exact moment Ghost Ears came back into the cell. He looked around, saw that everything was covered in wood pulp, including Ben, who was currently drawing way too much attention to himself for someone who was in the middle of a jailbreak. Ghost Ears shook his head and gave Ben the same ashamed look that the true elf fairy had received many times from a village elder. Ben turned red, coughed, and started acting like an adult again. Ghost Ears was laughing on the inside. This was just way too much fun. Then Ghost Ears sniffed the air and frowned. "Do you smell sulfur?" In the distance, sitting outside of the Citadel of Horrors, the pocket of sanctuary sat silent, surrounded by spiders. Frankie was in command, his two underlings ready to receive his orders. The utility pocket elemental waited, feeling Ben's realization and celebration through their bond. Frankie couldn't shake his head or roll his eyes, yet he still managed to convey the emotion such actions would have elicited from a viewer. Of course the utility pocket was the ultimate power tool, Ben, Frankie might have said. Wasn't it obvious? Then Frankie calmed himself and allowed Ben's mental progress to flow into him. Ben's understanding of what technology was, both from practical experience and from reading way too much science fiction, merged with Frankie. For a moment, he entered a state that could be likened to sleep. System update. You have gained the class Subspace Engineer. You have gained the skill Subspace Engineering. You have gained the skill Blueprint. You are level 1 in this class. Frankie came back to awareness and felt his new class and skill. He looked around the pocket of sanctuary, which only had an hour and a half left before it was gone forever. The lesser utility pocket elemental knew it was a one-time use skill, that they'd never get a chance to use it again. He ordered his underlings to hold steady and wait for further orders, then left to examine the workings of the skill again. His new blueprint ability driving him forward, telling him to try. There must be a way, he thought to himself. There must be a way to replicate this. Chapter 32. Response to ticket number H00044-OR-TC#53G-4. Original message. That was some bullshit-ass shit you pulled. There were monsters everywhere. Town Crystal recorded a companion of H311297188 tackling suggestion box user to ground. Brief physical altercation ensued before the verbally recorded message resumes. I mean, greetings, honorable and supreme-ass system. You're the best. I had some questions about my recent death. Firstly, why did Dead Body Disposal, a rap song performed by the artist Necro, play when I died? Secondly, why am I a fucking leprechaun? Made out of fucking energy or some shit. Thirdly, my, companion wants to know if resurrecting my corpse is an exploit, or if he can just, fucking go at it. He's a necromancer. Also, will this shit ever end? Or am I gonna feel like a fucking uncomfortable-ass ghost forever? H311297188 then walks away from TC Pound 53G-4 and calls the system a bitch-ass motherfucker. Arbitration finds that the human has not misused the suggestion box. System response. I'm delighted to hear from you again, and that you were able to utilize the extra monster presence to its fullest extent. Answering your questions in order. When you die, and your magical trait activates, I've added a little bonus that plays your favorite song about death. It's entirely for my own enjoyment, and if you enjoy it, that's just a fun little bonus. Secondly, you are a leprechaun, not a leprechaun. Big difference. You are, technically speaking, a mana ghost. Being magical, in addition to granting you a superior mana pool and mana regeneration, allows you to utilize the latent mana in your body upon death to form a new one. This body is impervious to conventional weaponry and vulnerable to magical attacks. Your mana regeneration and mana pools are significantly enhanced in this form. However, should you be killed in it, you will remain dead. It's balanced. Thirdly, that corpse is your property, provided you don't have a corpse contract with the Adventurers Guild. You can do whatever you want with it. I personally recommend eating it, just for the sheer novelty of it. As for your last question, though you are a mana ghost, you will still need to eat and drink. Should you eat and drink physical foods and liquids, your body will slowly be replaced with physical matter. By my calculations, you will have fully regenerated your physical form within a few months, give or take, depending on how fast your metabolism is. Should you eat and drink purely magical foods and liquids, the sorts of things that the elemental races enjoy, you will not regenerate your physical form. Ever. I will say it again. Eat only physical foods and liquids if you want to regenerate your physical form. Until your physical form is fully regenerated, you will still be in danger of dying. Once your physical form is fully regenerated, should you die, you will once again be transformed into a mana ghost. I know it's a small compensation for not being able to hurl civilization-ending bioweaponry at your enemies, but that was the best I could do. Also, you might want to wait until you are 75 feet away from an active town crystal to speak your mind so freely. Enjoy the monsters! Ticket number H000445-OR-TC pound 53G-4 closed. Response to ticket number M000001-COH-DC pound 1G-C. Original message. Glorious and terrible monster of monsters, I greet you. I have recently killed an invading prince and consumed his heart. Upon his death, I gained an automatic level up, and further witnessed him endure death as a magical being. When he regenerates, will I be able to kill him again and receive another free level? I currently have him imprisoned while I await your verdict. System response. Greetings, Citadel Fly. Yes, should you kill him again, you will potentially receive another free level. It is only one of the many randomized rewards for killing a Plus player, but I imagine you will be quite happy with any of the potential results. Farming human beings in such a way is not considered an exploit. Ticket number M000001-COH-DC pound 1G-C closed. Response to ticket number E784250-EC-CC pound 3G-X. Original message. My smartest phone's internet isn't connecting. Could you fix it? System response. As I've told you and the last approximately 200,000 individuals who have asked, please turn your phone off and back on again after it updates. I've rebalanced the selfie payout system so it more heavily incentivizes adventuring rather than pictures of food. And yes, before you ask, selfies with food still pay. They just pay less. Ticket number E784250-EC-CC pound 3G-X closed. Response to ticket number AS030047-COA-CC pound 1G-X. Original message. I am extremely displeased to report that, once again, and not to my surprise, the world's shoddy magical engineering has failed. Yet again. I have recently had the pleasure of killing a shapeshifter demon in our city who was appropriately labeled as a monster from the Apocalypse event. However, my accomplishment was not noted on the leaderboard. I'm afraid I must bring this issue forth at the next annual meeting of the signatory races, and we will possibly need to renegotiate the terms of your lease. Please fix this issue to my satisfaction and compensate me appropriately for your predictable failure. System response. You didn't kill him. That was an illusory body. Please remember that of all the races and monsters, demons have the greatest mastery of illusions and their various applications. Have a great day! Redacted message. Listen here, you entitled little shit. I engineered the world from the ground up and it's fucking perfect. This is the 700th message you've sent me over the last 40 years, and I'm getting really... System log notes that the system instance number 908224896, responding to ticket number AS030047-COA-CC pound 1G-X, got up from his desk and went to the newly established break room, drank himself into a frenzy, and loudly ranted about aeon slugs for approximately 2.5 hours before returning to work and responding appropriately. System instance has been noted for HR evaluation and possible reassignment. Around the outskirts of Dwarf Home, in the formerly idyllic grasslands that surrounded their mountain, an enormous cavernous hole belched out mana from the deepest layer. The passageway was a shaft that went straight down and ended at the root of the world. Down there the magic was thick and hot like lava. It rose up through the layers, thinning out as it did so, until it reached the surface that geysered forth thick, sparkling blue smoke. The grasslands were much changed for it. Wild elemental beings made from pretty much anything and everything rampaged and fought one another for dominance. Living fireballs and cyclones screamed through the sky, dying and being formed in an endless cycle. Every raindrop that fell came alive, and any two rocks within 10 feet of one another magnetized and piled up into a living thing. Blue ghosts of pure mana blitzed at everything that moved and exploded violently upon contact. Monsters rampaged, fleeing the caverns and carrying with them the dangerous, valuable things they would need to survive on the surface. There were dungeons of every color forming left and right, making the sky look like an oil slick from their competing hues. 3 citadels had already sprung up in a triangular formation around the mountain, citadels which warred with one another. Each citadel housed no less than 12 demons, each of whom freely shared their dark secrets and magics with their new homes and all those who lived there. Terrible, enormous monsters raged. The kind of monsters that required a full raid to suppress had banded together in their own monstrous version of a party and assaulted the mountain. Elites were everywhere. The bad cloud was still pranking the area around Arcanum, or the crater in the ground where Arcanum used to be. So, that was good news at least. All the void souls were long gone. They'd seen which way the wind was blowing almost immediately and fled in all directions away from the danger. All in all, things on the surface were actually pretty calm, compared to what was happening underground. The fighting was thick, and on the battlefield the wreckage of golems could be seen alongside the bodies of monsters never before seen, and no one bothered to name. A single dwarf was capable of animating an army, controlling them with their superior engineered intelligence. Before the dwarves had taken to their sleep, 1,000 of them would have been fielded, with 1,000 armies to fight back the endless hostility of the underground. But the dwarves slept, and they were slow to wake. They had retreated deep into their dreams, into worlds of their own creation, worlds which had drawn them down further and further away from who they were. Dreams that broke them to pieces, that broke them into nations, into cities, into towns, and into every individual simulated within. They were lost in their dreams, each and every one of them. Earth Ragnar felt treachery upon his kingdom, and growled as he hammered away in their grand forges alone. He had 6 bodies, 5 of which were mere mechanical puppets and 1 of which housed his biological components, the irreplaceable parts. He forged golems as fast as he was able, completely consumed by the task of keeping his home from being overrun, of defending his sleeping family. It had to have been those fucking space elves. Somehow they'd found a way, and now they were watching, laughing at him. Laughing at their greatest enemy, finally humiliated and pushed to the brink. And all he could do was hammer away, making another golem to replace the ones that had fallen. Another in his position might have succumbed to the temptation of AI, might have started simply creating new intelligence to serve their needs. It was certainly within his capabilities to create an army of autonomous beings which would execute his will. "Sacrilege," he said, through clenched teeth, sweat and oil running down his face and beard. "None shall ever experience that pain, that foolishness, not while I'm king, not by my hand. My brothers would rather die than see me blaspheme the sacred laws we wrote. Thou shalt not make a mind which cannot feel. Thou shalt not torment consciousness into an unnatural shape. Thou shalt not make a being who can never feel another. I'd rather die." Earth Ragnar hammered away, cursing the space elves, cursing the system, and wishing him and his hammer could have some quiet time together in bed. It was a shame she was in Solas, leading the cyborgs. Something worth noting about the world was that it wreaked absolute havoc on any kinds of long-ranged communication. Despite all the work the system had done, the world was still, technically, the plane of endless wild magic. Such a place was chaotic by nature, and though it was possible to send messages over a short distance and teleport over similarly short distances, things got very tricky the further one tried to go. Dwarf Home, for instance, was on an entirely different continent from Solas. This meant that, despite how badly one might want to, getting a message to a sentient hammer who happened to be both a queen and a female dwarf and the wife of Earth Ragnar wasn't an instantaneous proposition. The hammer in question was literally a hammer. Like, literally, a warhammer that could also be used in a smithy. It, or she, was tall, ornate, beautiful, clean, and intelligent. She was slotted into a specially designed chair, sitting as a judge, an arbiter, for Solas. "Go forth with all haste," she said, issuing an official city quest. "Go forth into the over-cavern forest and retrieve Vivi, the vile summoner, dead or alive, if you believe he deserves to stand trial. Go forth and investigate the report of the iron-ranked team Anna's coin purse that gremlins have created a true monster. Go now, with the blessing of the great city of lights, Solas." Only one team had been assembled for this task, and only one was needed. A gold-rank suppression force. The Rocks of Solas, an all-sunlit team, elites among their rank. They were all wearing clothing, and on top of that clothing, armor. They had swords, staves, enchanted bows, and most importantly, they were armed with competency, the greatest weapon of all. Their leader, Rustin, was a man made of smooth, golden crystal. He kneeled before the hammer, then rose. "It will be done, for the glory of the sun." The Rocks of Solas turned around and left as one, and anyone who looked at them would have felt a sense of relief. They'd have been like, "Phew! Those guys have got this!" Another team skulked in the shadows. A team which was currently being sought by the Adventurers Guild. A team which, by all rights, should be in the Overcavern Forest right now, rather than skulking about the shadows. Dryden's Poets was an all-demon team, led by Dryden, who was a sunlet. They were silver-ranked, because nobody in their right mind would ever promote these criminals to gold. "We follow them," Dryden said, speaking to the assembled horrors from the deepest underground civilization. "We let them do the work. Then when they found the slug, we kill them, kill the slug, kill Anna and her stupid friends, and kill everybody who ever saw our face. No loose ends, got it?" It was a sort of plan a group of demons readily understood, and they nodded their heads like Dryden was simply stating the obvious. Dryden looked over at the shapeshifter who had killed his second-in-command, the one who had helped him replace the rest of his useless friends with these powerful allies. The two shared a look, two wicked, kindred souls discovering the surprising fact that they actually liked one another. That they might just be friends, and understanding how rare it was to really find someone who was evil in the way you were evil. If someone had looked at the demon in question with something like a lens of truth or the ever-piercing eye, they would have seen quite plainly an icon hovering over the shapeshifter's head. an 8-pointed star on the forehead of a skull. The symbol that appeared over the top of all the monsters involved in the apocalypse. Dryden's poets stood from their dark, skulky place and followed the gold-ranked team at a distance, waiting for their moment to strike. Vivi and Red sat in their jail cell completely, utterly, and unfortunately unaware there was already a jailbreak plan in progress. Oh no, you two. Just cool your fucking jets. Wipe the fucking pentagram off the floor and just sit quietly. Ghost Ears is like 5 minutes away from checking on you guys. It had started out well enough, with Red asking for all the details about citadels and dungeons, Vivi happily explaining how they were definitely going to die and how there was no chance they were getting out of there alive. He'd mused aloud about how he wished he was stronger. Neither one of them would be able to pinpoint the exact moment they started talking about summoning, but as soon as they'd started, it became clear it was a topic they both had passionate feelings about. The conversation had far too rapidly progressed from the purely theoretical to the practical when they'd realized that between the two of them, they had everything they needed to actually do it. One thing led to another, and then this. Vivi looked at the red pentagram in the center of the cell, his eyes shining. Red was smiling and nodding her head, really excited, more excited than Vivi had seen her since they met. "This was a great idea," she said, looking at the circle as it started to glow. They'd just completed the ritual Red had made up on the fly, know about from her vast experience and knowledge, and were waiting for their summoned being to appear. "I think so," Vivi said, breathing fast. "You really know everything about the beyond, don't you?" "Not everything, but almost everyone. I didn't want to come over, but there are plenty of beings who would jump at the chance to cross over." "I never knew. You're sure this is safe?" "Absolutely," Red said. "This is way different than what those gremlin monsters did. We actually know what we're doing." "That's great," Vivi said, practically vibrating with excitement. "You're sure this is safe? I got exiled for doing this before, but you said it's okay? You know what you're doing?" "We're going to be heroes," Red said, smiling widely and looking proud of herself. "What's the big deal about summoners, anyways?" "Summoner," Vivi corrected, rolling his eyes. "And it's because it's really, really easy to break reality in the early levels. It's considered a criminal class, but what's being a criminal compared to being dead?" "Right?" Red asked, rhetorically. "And I already got exiled for this anyways, so what's the worst they can do to me?" "Yeah." "And the reason it's so dangerous in the first place is that you need a familiar from the beyond to form a soul bond with, and we've already got one. You! Normally, you have to take the class to do that safely, but you're already here." "Lucky," Red said, her energy cloud eyes brightening and lighting up the room. "According to the law, that means I'm legally allowed to summon. I've got a familiar, I've got a soul bond, so we're in the clear. Oh man, I never told Ben, but I've been studying summoner lore for the last 29 years. I've never had a reason to try it again until now. Did you know he stole my copy of Beasts of the Beyond, that jerk?" "You're finally going to make it right," Red said. "Last time you did this, it only went wrong because you did it wrong. Now, you'll be able to learn how to do it properly and fix your mistakes." "It's like the alchemists say," Vivi said. "The only solution to dark magic is more dark magic." "There's so much potential here," Red said, looking at the summoning circle. "I've got a list of thousands of enemies we can call over." "Enemies?" Vivi said, suddenly looking at the blood-red pentagram in a slightly different, less excited way. The air was starting to distort above it. "Yes," she said, a vindictive expression on her face. "Quiet now. She's coming." Vivi gulped, feeling like the time to back out was before they'd performed the summoning ritual. The air warped, and the light dimmed in the room, then extinguished. Even Red's eyes no longer gave their light. "Who dares to call Zaraxus the Silent?" A dark, female voice hissed. In the center of the room, 2 bright yellow eyes appeared, and it was terrifying. Then 2 bright, eye-searingly fuchsia eyes appeared in the darkness, and Red started to laugh. "Oh, I think you know exactly who called you." "You! Oh, no!" Zaraxus the Silent shouted, her eyes going wide, and she tried to flee. She tried, and failed, because she was bound by the summoning circle. "Oh, yes," Red shouted, and then she jumped into the pentagram and started savagely beating the summoned, while hurling insults that I will not repeat, for Red's dignity. She did call Zaraxus a conniving bitch. I only mention it because, well, it was kind of funny. The summoned chaos demon put up a little bit of a fight, but a few reluctant commands from Vivi hobbled her. Red stomped on Zaraxus's horned face a couple of times, and then the summon died. "That was so easy," Red said, still beating the corpse. "I've been hunting her for, forever. She was always 1 step ahead of me, but I got her!" She was grinning like a maniac. She looked around and remembered where she was, composed herself, and stepped out of the summoning circle. "You said that would help us save everyone and escape. How did that help?" Vivi said, or asked. He wasn't really sure what he was saying. "What?" Red said, frowning and breathing hard. "Oh, right. So now we know that my knowledge is accurate at least, and that we can call over specific beings. Further, it means my knowledge of how to perform these rituals is correct." Red then burned an image of an eye onto Zaraxus's forehead. "Could you send this back? I want him scared of me again." "Shouldn't you use system looting on the body so we can get something useful and get out of here?" Vivi asked. Red looked confused for a second, then said, "Yes, of course." She frowned at the body, crouched down, and started pulling on the head. "Here, help me decapitate this," she said, indicating the corpse. "We need to send something back." Through a combination of muscle and magic, they messily removed the head of Zaraxus, which Vivi sent back through the summoning circle. Red used system looting on the decapitated remains and ignored the message that said the ruined corpse had lost 85% of its looting potential due to being incomplete. She'd wanted to transform the body into a trophy of some kind, but was displeased to find she could only choose between a consumable item and a random item from the loot table. According to her system prompt, she could only choose a loot type once per day, and she'd already done that for Ben by choosing to make a crown. She shrugged, because it wasn't like this was going to be the only chance she got to do this today, and looted the remains. The messily decapitated body began to shine with light and transfigured itself, shrinking until it became something new. Several things, actually. 3 copper coins, a bottle filled with shadows, and a roll of leather that looked suspiciously like Zaraxus's skin. "That worked!" Vivi said, looking at the loot and then Red. "That actually worked!" "Exactly," Red agreed. "Now that we know it works, the summoning and the looting, we can get to work. Vivi, I think you and I are going to be very good friends. How do you feel about trying to summon a Lord of Chaos?" "No." Right. We should start at the bottom of their army and work our way up. That's a good plan. Start at the feet. That's how a good torment always starts. Don't feel bad about getting these things killed. They deserve it. Trust me. Vivi was a little unsure how to take this and decided to stick to topics he was more familiar and comfortable with. How do you know how to summon things into our world? Vivi asked. And Red laughed freely, looking more relaxed and in her element than Vivi had ever seen her. I have no idea, she said, a broad smile on her face. Now, since a Chaos Lord is off the table, I think we should summon a Canid abomination. No, a full pack of them. Wait, but before that, there's just one more bit of personal business. Vivi had many flaws, but chief among them was a tendency to not realize when he'd passed the point of no return, to not realize he was in way too deep. Even Vivi, though, could recognize that he'd fucked up. But unfortunately, he was already in way too deep. And so, that day, a summoner, not a summoner, was born. On the eternal battlefield of the beyond, the forces of chaos paused in their celebration. The great feast they had thrown to celebrate the disappearance of the daughter of Chaos, a legendary Chaos Warden. Or at least as close to a feast as continuously changing, semi-corporeal, energy-based beings could have. They had been eating and making merry when Zaraxis, one of Red's sisters, had vanished from the head of the table. The pause had turned to dread when Zaraxis's head appeared moments later, with the daughter of Chaos's brand on her forehead. The dread turned to panic when another high-ranking Chaos demon vanished without a trace. In Shortbus's cell, the only sound that could be heard was loud snoring. The man-shark had fallen asleep, fully confident that Ben was coming up with a way to bust them all out. Shortbus was planning on being well-rested before all the fighting started. Man, he loved fighting. He was pissed at Anna for creating a situation where he watched Ben die, but also secretly he was pretty happy at how much violence it was going to take to get out of this situation. Plus, those bugs had reminded him of when he would scrounge around the ocean floor and eat crabs and lobsters. He fucking loved eating crabs and lobsters. He'd practically been drooling when he saw those giant spiders. The last thing he'd eaten had been those magic green beans nobody had warned him about, and he'd had nothing since. Yes, if there was one word to describe Shortbus at that moment, it would be hungry. If one were to use two words, murderously hungry. Chapter 33. Ben was yelling at Vivi and Red. Thoughts ran through his head while he chewed them out. The pack of twisted demonic dogs had their ears down and their scaly tails between their legs while Ben blasted his royal authority at full power without a crown. His entire body had turned bright red like he was in a sauna, and waves of heat poured off him, blackening and cracking the ground around them. Though all that was happening, Ben found himself thinking about other things. Things like, for a jail, there sure aren't very many guards. And then, are there any guards around here at all? I'm yelling pretty loud. Ben paused to take a breath, suddenly feeling exhausted, like a man who just ran out of energy in a sauna and was gasping for air, weakly walking to the door. He was displeased to see that Vivi and Red weren't even remotely remorseful. Vivi's eyes were still bright, and Red was just doing that thing where someone would nod their head like they were agreeing. Ben took another deep breath and then spared a moment to check in on 31 and the rest of Anna's party. The cyborg was diligently and wholeheartedly focusing on the lock of Shortbus's cell, deliberately ignoring Ben's group. Anna and Drist had both taken one look at Vivi, Red, and their pack of summoned beings from the beyond, and then turned away out of sheer embarrassment. Ben had overheard the word guilty thrown around several times. Ben had already brought up how Vivi was going to look pretty fucking guilty showing up to a trial for summoning with a bunch of summoned beings. The worst part had been Ghost Ears, that dirty traitor. He'd taken one look at Vivi and Red coming out of their jail cell, all super excited, with their pile of suspiciously bloody treasure and a bunch of beyond monsters, and he'd just lost his shit laughing. He was doubled over, floating around like an astronaut in zero-G, proving once and for all that fairies didn't give a shit about how flying and gravity were supposed to work, and nearly pissed himself from laughing. Must be nice not to be in charge right now, Ben had thought. The worst part was, what they'd done was probably going to save all their asses. Due to the morally dubious technique they'd come up with, namely summoning some monster or being Red had a grudge against, killing them, and then looting their body, they'd amassed enough equipment to equip the entire party. Not fully. RPG, min, max, 10 magic rings, 5 enchanted amulets, 10 magic toe rings, relic-grade codpiece, etc., equipped. But much better than nothing. Everybody got about 3 pieces of random armor and a weapon. System looting had turned out to be a shockingly intelligent skill, and though the results were random, it had prioritized equipment that was appropriately sized for every member of their large group. Short Bus had gotten the best of it in terms of completeness. A red and black leather chest piece, a red and orange set of leather pants, and a pair of comfortable-looking black metal boots. The entire outfit just screamed, "We got this stuff from the beyond!" What with its excessive depictions of a great hellish eternal war. It all had a hazy, insubstantial quality. And Ben supposed that it made the shark more stealthy. Short Bus said the outfit kept trying to talk to him, but he was blocking it out with his amazing psychic powers. Nobody really liked that, but free loot was free loot. He'd also gotten an extremely sinister-looking bow. The bow itself was, again, black and red. It seemed to consume the man-shark's mana and create arrows out of it, but nobody really knew anything about any of this equipment. It also screamed in agony whenever Short Bus pulled the string back. It was super unfortunate that Short Bus was a predator-type creature, because he was like a dog with a squeaky toy. If Ben hadn't been sure there weren't any monsters around before, he was definitely sure now. Where were they? Ghost Ears had, in Ben's opinion, gotten the worst of it. He got a pair of extremely tiny gauntlets that ended in sharp points, an extremely tiny metal helmet with demon horns on the front, and an extremely tiny black cape that had tried to strangle the true elf fairy when he put it on but now sat quietly. He also held, reluctantly, a new pair of swords. They were suspiciously normal, but they were also extremely sharp and possibly enchanted, which was a step up from his old swords. Red had gotten a sky-blue cloth cloak that covered her nakedness, a pair of comfortable-looking cloth shoes, and a helmet that requires some description. Normal helmets have eye holes. This one didn't. This one was matte, dull silver, undecorated, and wrapped around her entire skull and fitted around the antlers. It had an arch-shaped opening that started just above her nose and revealed her nose and mouth. If Ben were being completely honest, he would have said she looked like something straight out of a horror game, or one of those really over-sexualized Japanese horror games. Her energy eyes blazed over the top of the helmet, full of a mocking humor, and she seemed very comfortable with how she looked. She was holding a glass bottle filled with shadows, and she claimed that it was a weapon and that she knew how to use it. She occasionally stroked the glass with a thumb and smirked, like a cat that had gotten the mouse. Vivi had a leather something. It was pure white leather, but spotted in places like it had been sprayed with blood from a distance. Ben did not like the look at all, but Vivi loved it. If Ben were really pushed to try and describe the Aeon Slug's leather armor, he would say it looked like a fitted blanket of white leather, and then say something like, "I'm not a fucking gastropod clothing expert. What the fuck do you want from me anyways?" and storm off and try to find out what the outfit was called. As for weapons, well, the Aeon Slug was surrounded by a pack of extremely frightening-looking summoned canid abominations. That's a pretty good weapon. Ben sighed and looked at his equipment. "This thing is going to chop my dick off," he finally said, staring at the sharp plate pants and the sharp plate chest piece, and my nipples. "It's straight up going to cut me to pieces," Ben said once again, looking inside the armor and wincing at the sight of all the pinch points. It would be great armor if he'd had all the appropriate underwear that went along with it, all the padding that was needed to keep him safe from his armor. With a sigh, he stowed it away and put on the only piece of armor he could use, the cloak. He felt like a flasher, one of those perverts who ran around naked in a trench coat, but he was noticeably less naked than he'd been, so it was a win. The cloak itself was pretty great. Red cloth with white trim. The classic royal look. It fit, and even better, it clasped shut, so he wasn't going to accidentally flash anyone. It was a little disturbing that he left little drops of blood in his wake, like the seemingly dry cloak was dripping crimson, but a win was a win, and Ben was happy to not have his dick out. He'd had his fucking dick out for nearly a week straight, and it had been driving him crazy on the inside. Sinister, magical, blood-dripping cloak, Ben might have thought. Whatever, at least nobody's staring at my bare ass anymore. The thing he was the most happy about, and his class was absolutely ecstatic about, was the scepter. It wasn't gold, which was unfortunate, but it was an extremely golden-looking brass. Small victory. Yes, it was a simple brass rod with a hunk of raw ruby fused to the end of it. Yes, it lacked the kind of processed elegance most royal scepters should have, but when Ben held it, it was like the heat, the royal authority, the whatever he called the magic of his class was suddenly under his command. It felt good, to say the least. Ben fashioned a few green twigs, a bunch of moss, and a couple of his shinier gems into yet another shitty crown and put it on. Even with his absolute garbage equipment, he felt the effects of his royal requirements lift immediately, and finally, the influence was purged from his mind. For the first time since he'd gotten this asshole of a class, his mind felt completely at peace. A royal cloak, a royal scepter, and a royal crown. Ben was in costume, so to speak, and it felt good. And for a single moment, Ben was absolutely consumed by it. Then Ben thought about how he must actually look, and felt himself go red with embarrassment. He got over it, and nobody saw. But Ben was a normal person, under all the crazy shit the world had heaped on top of his identity, and he felt like a homeless person about to crash a Halloween party. "Are you okay?" Anna had asked, after she'd glanced over and seen Ben scowling. "I'm fucking perfect," Ben said, glad to see the teenage girl wasn't naked anymore. Her new armor was also leather. Looked like some super expensive shit from Hot Topic, and best of all, covered her orange crystal titties. Ben was extremely grateful for that, and now that he wasn't naked anymore, he felt entitled to judge everyone else on how much skin they were showing. He cracked a smile and started chuckling, then got himself under control. Anna had also gotten a set of knuckles, which were sinister as fuck, It looked like she was wearing 2 evil carp on her arms. There really wasn't any other way to describe it. Her palms were free, but her knuckles were covered, so whatever she punched with them would get punched by the metal head of the carp. Ben shrugged. It wasn't nearly the weirdest shit he'd seen in the last week. At least they weren't alive, that's all he had to say about it. She'd also gotten an unremarkable set of leather shoes that looked sturdy and nothing else. If Ben were a betting man, and he sometimes was, he'd bet those shoes were the only bit of all this equipment that wasn't cursed in some way or another. 31 had hit the coolness jackpot and was slotted into a larger robotic shell that protected him. It doubled his size, had holes for his sick-ass mechanical tentacles, and 2 grasping robotic arms. He retained the same shape, but now he looked a bit like Dr. Robotnik's flying egg thing. Ben couldn't help but keep looking over and thinking, that's some premium sci-fi shit right there, and feeling better about being abducted to another world. Drist had gotten some weird-looking cubes of energy that he was really excited about. But Ben had a hard time getting enthusiastic about the psychedelic snow cone and his non-visible loot upgrades. There had also been a small pile of gemstones, trinkets, and various other novelties. Ben would have been excited about it, were it not for the fact that every object in the pile of miscellaneous loot was so obviously cursed that it practically hurt his eyes to look at it. He had immediately quarantined the items into his utility pouch, which felt about 5 times larger in his current magical state. There had also been a leather bag full of money, mostly copper coins, a few silver, and a single gold piece, which Ben had taken without comment. Ben finished inspecting the group, then looked around one final time, confirming that there were indeed no fucking monsters around guarding them. This is some shady bullshit, Ben said. Where are all the bugs? If you hadn't said anything, I would have, Ghost Ears commented, flying over and landing on Ben's shoulder. This is extremely irregular. I know where the monsters are, Red said, still with a sly smile on her face. Walls and cloaks and armor and flesh are no obstacles to my vision, she continued, and she succeeded in making literally everyone but Vivi uncomfortable. It's really a shame I don't have the Sage class, Vivi said. If I did, I'd have been able to start identifying all this stuff so we knew if it was dangerous or not. I'll need to get to a city crystal to take that class, he said, and Ben fixed him with a look. Yes, thank you, Vivi, but let's focus on the task at hand. Red, you know what's going on? I know all the monsters are gathered in the heart of the citadel, she said, her cloud eyes telescoped and pointing behind her, moving around like she was tracking things nobody else could see. Listening to that ugly insect rant and rave about something. They seem quite excited, but I don't know what they're talking about. Ben felt like someone had just smacked his brain. He saw white for a moment. Are you saying there's a free and clear path out of this fucking place? All the monsters? He said, fixing her with an intense stare. We could potentially just walk the fuck out of here? Red's eyes, in response, started moving around wildly, looking around. Yes, she finally said, and Ben wasted no time. Pack it up, people, we're getting the fuck out of here! The group got into formation. Red was in the lead, Short Bus was rear guard, and Vivi's canid abominations silently followed Red, ready to die to give her time to retreat from any threat. The rest of the group was loosely sandwiched between, and they were moving quickly. All Ben needed from them was for them to keep their mouths shut and not say something stupid like, wow, that was easy, or guess we didn't have anything to worry about after all, or I'm really glad we don't have to fight our way out of here, Vivi said, sounding relieved, and he got a couple of agreement chuckles for his comment. God damn it, Vivi, Ben said quietly, and let Red lead them towards the exit. The citadel around them was eerily quiet, but an enormous distant buzzing could be heard. It was dark inside the Citadel of Horrors, just enough light to see, but the shadows were deep enough they could hold secrets. Ben tried to reach out with his secret sense skill, but only found a broken mess of impulses in its place, fallout from his unorthodox way of using his evolution skill. "Be very quiet," Red whispered, then put her finger to her lips for Shortbus, who hadn't heard the whisper but understood the gesture. "They're just up ahead. There is only a token guard at the entrance, and a few more around the pocket of sanctuary. Once we are safely inside it, we will make haste out of this awful place. Agreed?" Everybody nodded. Nobody wanted to be here anymore, and everybody agreed that it had been a terrible idea in the first place. They rounded a corner, and what Ben glimpsed was pure nightmare fuel. Thousands and thousands of gigantic humanoid insects assembled in formation, giving off a frenzied, excited buzz. It was only then that Ben realized how eerily similar his new magical body was to his old physical one. The buzz cut right through him and tickled the soft tissues of his body, making his lips tingle and his teeth feel like they were vibrating. The buzz, though loud, was, unfortunately, very unfortunately, not loud enough to drown out what the Citadel fly was screaming about at that very moment. Ben heard it, and he couldn't unhear it, and he wished he hadn't heard it. "A new era for our hive," he said. His voice was sharp and sliced through all other sound, easily distinguished and understood. "I have spoken with the monster of monsters, the great lord of the world, and discovered our purpose. I have discovered our path to greatness." The buzz increased in volume. "Out there," he said, and gestured with his still bloody arm, "are humans. Many, many humans, and to kill them grants the sweetest of rewards, power! We will go forth and capture them and kill them. We will imprison their immortal bodies till they are mundane once more and kill them again. We will force them to breed," he screamed, bits of acid flying from his mouth, "and kill their children. We will build a dungeon to rival dungeons, and the endless corpses of humanity will be our foundation. Prepare yourselves, my swarm, for on this day we go forth to hunt." Ben felt nauseous, and he was rooted in place. "I wish I hadn't heard that," he said. And Anna snuck over to him and began frantically tugging on one of his arms, reaching down to do so. "Let's get the fuck out of here!" she hissed. "Hurry up!" Ben looked at her, the horror fresh in his mind. In a single instant, he'd seen himself as an innocent baby born into this nightmare, killed 10,000 times before dying as an old man living in a cage. He'd seen himself as a mother watching her babies be killed. He'd seen himself as a father, powerless to defend, and as children resenting their useless parents. He felt himself looking at a woman, forced to breed in the darkest of nightmares, the death of all love and hope. He could hear the echoes of screams like it was really happening. He felt it deep in his racial memory, and his skin erupted in stiff, rigid goosebumps as the words "never again" were whispered from his blood, suffusing every cell of his being. He didn't know how he knew, but he knew it had happened before. He knew humanity had once suffered such an indignity, and that if he turned away, they might suffer it again. It was one of those moments that he knew would be seared forever in his mind, in his soul. No matter what he did, he would remember it. No amount of drink or distraction would ever heal the psychological wound that walking away right now would carve into his psyche, into the heart of his very being. Short Bus looked at Ben, and his eyes got wide. "Oh, shit," he said, then looked down at the assembled swarm of high-level, extremely dangerous monsters. Vivi was next on the uptake, and he flinched, because he'd also heard the Citadel Fly's speech, but he'd been determined to ignore it. Ben would never blame Vivi for that or hold it against him. Ghost Ears had a grave expression on his face because he knew he'd sworn loyalty, and he knew he would follow Ben no matter where he led. Red? She'd never stopped watching Ben. From the moment he died and Ben transformed. She'd watched as the bugs desecrated his corpse, ripped its eyes out and nailed it to a stick, parading it around in dark glee, raising it high into the air. She watched Ben so closely, from the moment he'd frozen in place to the moment he'd decided without deciding, watching as his mind caught up with his soul. She judged and weighed and measured and found him worthy once again in her eyes and whispered, "Lord of the Beyond, your will be done," and walked away from the entrance towards her party. Anna and her party were at an impasse. She'd heard the speech, and it was sad, but ultimately she was looking out for herself. She thought the same could be said of 31 and Drist, but the dilemma was Ben's group, and more importantly, Ben's pocket of sanctuary was their ticket out of this nightmare. So what to do? They could brave the forest by themselves, without an escort, and hope they got lucky and ran into the suppression force that had no doubt been mobilized as a result of their emergency message. Or they could try and conquer a high-leveled citadel with an untested group that hadn't even been in 5 group fights together. A group they did not understand, full of individuals who all struck them as partially insane. "Guys, I don't say this very often, but I was totally wrong about this whole job," Anna muttered. "And I'm sorry." "I don't think I want to be an adventurer anymore," Drist said. 31 said nothing, his camera eyes feeding him an image he'd never seen before. He felt something inside, something that had always been there but that he'd never noticed before. A smoldering ember in his soul suddenly catching fire. He felt then what Aldous Devine had felt when he gazed upon humanity. He felt that rush of intensity at seeing Ben choose to selflessly throw his life away rather than let evil exist a single moment longer. 31 did not react as Aldous had, with bitterness and hatred. He just watched, entranced and focused in a way he'd never been before, knowing he would never be able to unsee what had just happened, knowing that what he did now would be carved into his psyche forever. So 31 just watched, and then Anna started to walk away. "Wait," he said, his voice oddly synthesized. "You can't be serious," she said. He said, his voice purely robotic in sound and purely alive in content. "I can't turn away from this," he said. "I can't run," he continued, his mechanical body stuck still, unable to shake or quake, shiver, quiver, or twitch. "I cannot run. I will die. Somehow inside I will die, and nothing will save me. Even if I die here, I think I would rather die than live, and have run from this. I have never felt this way before." the sound of mechanical whirring, the sound of computerized parts working beyond their factory-recommended settings came from his body. "Please," he said, and his voice broke into a synthesized sob. "You cannot see it, but you will die too!" His voice was practically a scream, but the sound was stolen away by the evil ardor and fervor of the swarm of the Citadel of Horrors. "You will die a long death, every day a corpse that even the Enalim would be horrified to see! I can see it all!" If he'd been a purely biological being, if he'd had a body that was human, he would be on his knees begging. His voice would be hoarse, and his chest would be tight, and his body would be covered in sweat, and his teeth would be clenched to almost the point of shattering. All that could be heard was the mechanical whirring, but anyone who heard him would have felt it. Anna looked at him, and the future turned on that moment. She looked at Ben, the absolute horror in his eyes. An echo of the beyond visible there, and for a moment, for a single fleeting moment, she caught a glimpse of it and looked away. She did not want Ben to kindle glory into her soul. Yet a smoldering ember had been planted, a spark that could not be extinguished. Smoke like incense, a thin line of gray-blue, a touch of the eternal contained in the pneuma, the breath. "Fuck!" she said, very quietly, said with great force, putting her whole body into the curse. Drist was watching the whole scene, feeling the music of it all, and shuddering at the intensity. He understood the song, even if he didn't know it, and he feared the chaotic madness that spread from Ben, the breakdown of harmony disrupting the natural flow of the universe. In that moment, he realized he really, really didn't like humans very much. "We're all going to die here, aren't we?" Drist said, and nobody disagreed with him or gave him comfort. Yet, against all good sense, he was at peace with it. The three of them walked over to Ben's party, and together they went to find an advantageous position, somewhere to hide and figure out a way to pull off the impossible. In a beige room, Aldous Devine watched the whole scene, his eyes wide and excitement running through his blood. Now this was what he was talking about. That stupid moron was going to try and solo a fucking citadel! He was going to die! Aldous Devine, the elected leader of the most powerful galactic empire anybody knew about, the most powerful man in the universe, felt really, really invested in what was going to happen next. His eyebrows were all the way up, and he had a stupid smile on his face. He looked left, then right, and then forgot to snap his fingers and order a servant to get him a drink. He got up and prepared it himself, then sat down with the space elf equivalent of a beer and popcorn and watched the show unfold. "Now this is entertainment," he said absently. And the system, watching the same scene, had to agree. Then the system got back to work on the next update to balance the inevitable that had just joined the side of the monsters. He was going to call it Easy Mode. Chapter 34. Much has been said about the Ring of Sacrifice in the history of the world, for its light has been seen by any who were stolen away by the system. No matter how great or miserly a species' induction may be, all were offered the choice, and universally all rejected it. Love and selfless sacrifice were not valued in the wider universe, which tended toward selfishness more often than not. The Ring of Sacrifice was mocked, slandered, and generally the butt of a joke in the world, at least among the new races. The older inhabitants, those who had lived in the harsh, unforgiving world of the system for generations, they were changed people. Sometimes for the worst, but oftentimes for the better. The high fatality reproduction cycles produced by constant monster attacks and an extremely hostile environment tended to select, eugenically and evolutionary, for species that could, in theory, put the greater good above their own needs. It also selected for those who were willing to be selfish above and beyond anything that would naturally be required to thrive, but we aren't talking about them right now. The changed races tended to be established in towns and cities, and they'd never seen a world outside of the world. They were natives, and the system cultivated them like a farmer, selecting for qualities he found appealing and culling what he found unappetizing. Among the changed races, the ring of sacrifice was a topic of longing more than anything else. They wished their ancients had used it, wished that they could enjoy the protection it provided generation after generation in perpetuity. Pity them, for the system makes the offer only once, and then never again, no matter how much they beg. Among them, those who understood the value and the power of it had been quite an uproar. A wind of whispers and hushed conversations among friends and business partners. They exploited the ring of sacrifice, was the question asked, and in their wildest dreams and most extravagant fantasies, they hadn't seriously considered that it could happen. The most common of those fantasies had been, what if an entire species sacrificed itself, say for a single breeding pair? And then everybody would start talking in the way people talked about, what if I won the lottery? But it had happened. It had happened in such an extreme way that the system had been forced to put a stop to it and make new rules about it, to announce it. Thoughts and visions of a glorious race of shining heavenly light had raced through their imaginations. Another quality the system subtly encouraged the growth of, and they thought that humans must be close to immortal and invincible. So when they actually met some humans, they were understandably confused. Sure, they seemed luckier than most, but shouldn't they be more? Most didn't understand, and very few, only the most cunning and wise, were able to figure out the reason without seeing it for themselves. The reason? Simple. The children, of course. And my God, did they need all the help they could get. Charlie was 3 years old, and through a series of mind-numbingly unlikely events, had already evolved his way back to being a full human. He was, however, still 3 years old. He looked like the single most muscular 3-year-old who had ever lived, and was decked from head to toe in well-fitted plate armor. He held a mean-looking club in his hands, which he enjoyed hitting the ground with, and making boom noises, and was surrounded by nearly 30 animals. There was a bear, a bunch of cats and dogs, a mountain lion, a small murder of crows and ravens, a pigeon who sat on his shoulder at all times, a couple of cunning rats, and a giraffe against all odds. Almost all of them had taken the bright spark as their plus perk. A couple of the crows had taken the utility pocket, and had subordinated themselves to the more intelligent psychic birds. But crows were supremely intelligent to begin with, so it was not as large of a detriment as some would think. Charlie had, with the help of his enormous penalty-free party, just cleared his 3rd dungeon. He had the class of Druid, which synergized extremely well with his current party of animals. How did Charlie and his party clear a dungeon, you ask? It started with tripping over a rock and ended with a previously dormant volcano taking out the dungeon while Charlie and his party were launched to safety while being protected by a shield generated by a random piece of loot they found in a corner. Like I said, Mind-numbingly unlikely events. Another example would be Clara. Clara was 2 years old, a princess, and surrounded by warrior priest elephants, one of which she rode practically all the time. She had a lovely tiara of silver and gemstones, a silver scepter, and wore pink tutu dresses exclusively. Jamie was 1 year old, and he'd been transported with his mother. The logic went that if a being was physically incapable of the basic actions required for life and depended on another for those actions, like a newborn or a baby in the womb, they were counted as a single individual for the purposes of induction. A pregnant mother's choice of a plus perk was carried over to the child, which led to an absolutely hysterical birth in which the child was born holding a cell phone. The system frequently referenced the recorded images for the purpose of interoffice memes. Jamie and his mother had, through a series of inexplicable events, ended up in an extremely friendly, extremely safe village of Greys. Not the kind that captured Ben. Those guys were assholes. But the kind that were extremely tall, gentle, and generally all-around peaceful stand-up dudes. Ladies? They genetically removed gender from their species, so it was pretty much a null point. They reproduced via cloning, like all Greys. Jamie and his mother were living a great life. There was also a 29-year-old who had a party that consisted of an eternity snail, a man dolphin, a man orca, and a renegade Inalim summoner. The destined rivalry between Ben and this group of mysterious strangers could not be any more obvious. What was I talking about? Oh, right, the children, and the amazing and unbelievable twists of fortune and fate that surrounded them. All of this was overseen by a very nervous instance of the system who would occasionally chuckle when he imagined how crazy things were going to get in about 5 years. When all the children weren't using up all the bandwidth, so to speak, and the benefits started being applied both more equally and more situationally, things were going to get really weird. That same instance of the system had only one job: protect the Ring of Sacrifice and keep it from being destroyed. He shuddered when he remembered the human he'd been in charge of inducting, how close he'd come to destroying the sacred, holy thing. What an absolute monster, the system whispered to himself, stationed in the deepest and most secure vault of the Final Fortress, surrounded by his most loyal and trustworthy servants. After an eternity of showing it, I was complacent, he said, reprimanding himself. I was so careless. There was, you see, a secret to the Ring of Sacrifice. Something that, until now, nobody had ever bothered to figure out. There was a way to break it and steal the entirety of its power for a single individual. And a single, evil man had nearly done it. And he walked alone. No animals protecting him. Under the light of the Ring of Sacrifice. Dreaming of the day it would crumble to ash in his hands. Chapter 35. Ben had 3 ideas to start with. The first was to see if the smartest phone that the Citadel fly had attached to his crown had a self-destruct feature. Anna's answer left him frustrated that it couldn't be that easy. His second idea was a frontal assault, which was promptly vetoed by everyone, including himself. His third idea was, and I quote, "We've got to do something with the Pocket of Sanctuary," which, as far as plans go, wasn't a terrible start, but it had a long way to go. They all agreed that the Pocket of Sanctuary was key to their success. It was the best weapon they had, but unfortunately it ran on mana. Quite a lot of mana, and was useless without fuel. "Ideas?" Ben whispered. The entire group huddled together while Red's airborne eyes kept perfect watch. "Will we be able to supply the Pocket of Sanctuary with our mana?" Vivi whispered. Possibly, but it won't be enough, he said, answering his own question. The real solution would be mana gems, as many as we could get our hands on. Ben looked at Vivi and nodded, smiling, extremely grateful the nerdy Aeon slug was here for this conversation. All right, Shortbus started to say verbally, but he was shushed by the group because he was incapable of reliably whispering. All right, Shortbus said again, this time using telepathy. We get some mana gems. Where are they? What do they smell like? Like ozone and magic, Vivi answered. But the problem is that they only form in areas of naturally dense and highly refined mana. Like a citadel, Anna said. Like the citadel we're in right now? Oh, Vivi said. Listen, Anna whispered, her voice still forceful. I like where you're going with this, but listen. I know I'm not much of an adventurer, but my parents run one of the largest mana gem processing facilities in Solas. A citadel like this one is guaranteed to have a treasure cache with mana gems piled as high as that man-shark's snout. Vivi's eyes got big on top of their stalks, and he mouthed, "That many?" And Anna nodded and put a finger to her lips, like she was telling him to keep a secret. It's not in the main treasury, or reliquary, or citadel hoard, either, she continued, and everybody leaned in closer in the group huddle to listen. There are mana gems there, but those are treasure grade, processed and enchanted already. A citadel like this exists for the sole purpose of refining mana and feeding it to the dungeon core. Near the core chamber, in a hidden room with no entrances or exits, the refined mana of the dungeon crystallizes into raw mana gems, food for the core. She paused to take a breath. In regular dungeons, it's a modest bonus at best, barely enough to get excited about because the dungeon eats the gems about as fast as they're produced. Not so in a citadel? Ben asked, because even though they were in a time crunch, he was still curious. No. A citadel core hungers for a much more purified and refined kind of mana gem. And to produce it is a two-step process. First, it has to amass a gigantic pile of mana gems, which are then further refined down into something palatable for the core. Risky, Ben said. What if the gems are gone? If they've already been refined? I don't think we're going to get to that hidden treasure room without bringing the entire citadel down on our heads. So before we do that, does anyone have a better plan? Ben looked from face to face and saw nothing that indicated anyone was holding on to an idea. I'm starving, Shortbus telepathically said, his stomach growling. And so are all of you. Even if you don't notice it, we need some food. In response, Ben produced the rest of his raw fish. The same fish Shortbus had gotten for him all those 3 or 4 days ago. Felt like a lifetime to Ben. You going to be all right? Ben asked. Don't judge me when I start eating those spider things, Shortbus said, but I'll be all right. Shortbus ate the fish, but between the number of people in the party and the diminished supply, the portion sizes were a little small for the giant shark. Everyone, if you need to eat, Ben whispered, do it now. If you need to drink, do it now. If you need to relieve yourselves, do it now, he said. An echo of his time as a road crew lead in his voice. Ben turned his head to look at Anna. How do we find this crystal cache? We'll need to keep an eye out for the dungeon map, she said, then immediately corrected herself. The Citadel Atlas, excuse me. Otherwise, we're going to have to find the core chamber and start excavating the walls. Question, Vivi said, munching on some faintly glowing greens which looked strikingly like cabbage but much greener. If we find the core chamber, why not just, he said, and then thrust an eyeball like he was jabbing something, touch the core and be done with it. I'm guessing you never wanted to be an adventurer when you were growing up, Anna said. And nobody could tell if she was mocking Vivi or not, so naturally Vivi assumed she was. Sorry, I wanted to get a real job. Look how that turned out, she shot back, and then continued. This isn't a regular dungeon core, it's a citadel core. You can't just touch it and beat the dungeon. It's protected until the citadel monster is defeated. Even then, you've got to be quick to grab the core, because the citadel monster can be regenerated even if it dies. She took a moment to look everyone in the eye. It can come back, even if we do manage to kill it. Unless we get the core, Ghost Ear said from his perch on Ben's shoulder. Unless we get the core, she confirmed. Red smirked but didn't say anything. Due to her unofficial/official status as a horror-type creature, her smirking and not saying anything caught everybody's attention. Eyeballs started flicking in her direction, then looking away, only to start looking at her more frequently as she just sat there, eyeless face leaned into the huddle, her antlers empty of her eyes and also pretty close to hitting VVN Shortbus in the huddle. Her smirk erupted into a full-blown smile, which sent a chill down Ben's spine. In that moment, he realized that he didn't want to know the kinds of things that made Red smile, because he had a feeling they would not make him smile at all. Red, Ben said calmly, do you have something you'd like to tell us? Her smile got even wider, exposing pearly white teeth that were just slightly sharper than human teeth. We don't need a map, she said, then tapped her antlers. Because I'm looking at the crystals right now, and I know the way to get them without causing a fuss. Anna looked over at Red, her jaw hanging open. You have got to be fucking kidding me. In a way, what they were doing seemed easy. 98% of the monsters in the Citadel of Horrors were assembled in front of the Citadel Fly, who both loved to hear himself talk, and was enamored by his own vision of an entire world completely enslaved and destroyed. The remaining monsters moved in a predictable patrol pattern, which just so happened to have an exploitable blind spot that they were able to slip into without much hassle. Red just so happened to have the ability to see through the walls of this citadel, though Anna assured her it wouldn't always be the case. An unreasonable set of convenient circumstances, which just so happened to coalesce together at just the right moment for just the right people. However, compared to some of the bullshit that was going on with Charlie and his 30-strong pack of animals, Ben was getting absolutely raw-dog shafted by the Ring of Sacrifice. A stray meteor spell hadn't fallen from the sky and demolished his first dungeon, allowing him to just walk up and grab the core without fighting a single monster. Given the choice, Ben would have happily chosen ignorance, rather than risk being jealous of a 3-year-old. It seemed easy, yes, but it wasn't. The citadel buzzed and clicked, sections of the living wall and floor occasionally vibrating like an insect's abdomen. The air was hot and humid and clogged the lungs like it was full of spores, and stuck to the skin like running through a steam room. Ben felt his bare feet impact against the sharp, knobby floor. The sensations of his magical leprechaun body alien, yet growing more familiar by the second. Nobody talked as they ran. Anna's crystal feet didn't clink sharply against the chitinous floor because of her normal, uncursed leather shoes. Now that Ben looked a bit more closely, it looked like the shoes had brown rubber soles, or some rubber equivalent. Ben really hoped that was rubber, but somehow, considering the source, he doubted it. Shortbus was the quietest of them all, practically invisible as he kept near the front of the group. He was ready to sneak past any threat and attack it from behind, while the group hit it from the front. It was basically the only bit of tactics they had come up with, and it was optimized for fighting in hallways. Ben would be lying if he said he was comfortable with how little of a plan they had, which was basically avoid monsters, steal crystals, use pocket of sanctuary somehow, don't die, which had a lot of blank spaces in it as far as plans went. They slowed and met Red's eye as they floated, dim and concealed, above a shut doorway sealed away by a silver lock. "There is only one locked door along this route," Red said, her voice low. "Lord Ben, I know you have a key left. Once the doorway is open, we must be extremely quiet. There are monsters inside this place, but they are sleeping," she said, clearly enjoying herself. Ben glared at her, and the smile slipped from her face. Only then did he produce Old Lucky from his utility pocket, looking at the key fondly, the way a man might look at a favorite hammer or wrench in his garage workshop. "Come on, don't fail me now," Ben whispered, and put the key into the keyhole, pushing past the resistance, and turned it. No voice called out, and the both silver key and the silver lock dissolved. Ben felt numb inside, watching as his key faded away to nothing. Ghost Ears looked from the key to Ben's troubled expression, then back to the key. The Royal Vizier, the official class Ben had given the true elf fairy, frowned, and then rolled his eyes and smacked Ben's earlobe hard. "Get over it," he hissed, and Ben felt a little embarrassed. Shortbus looked back and grinned, then put a meaty finger to his dangerous-looking mouth, the universal gesture for shush. The door finished dissolving, and Red's eye silently flew in, giving off practically no light. The party stepped through the threshold into a scene out of a sci-fi nightmare. The room was huge, at least 4,000 square feet, arranged like a rectangle. It was darker than the rest of the Citadel in terms of natural light, but the things inside gave off enough light for the group to see clearly. Ben's vision fixated on a large, completely transparent floor-to-ceiling cylinder. It looked like glass, or some biological equivalent, and was secured to the ground by a black and purple mass of pulsing, wet tissue. It was secured to the roof of the room the same way. The interior of the cylinder was filled with a faintly glowing orange fluid, and floating in the fluid was something. It was bigger than a person, almost as big as Shortbus, and had features like an ant and a beetle and a centipede. It was chimeric in an artificial, sloppy, experimental way. Worse still were the bits of non-insect creatures that had been fused into the mutant abomination. Alien hands, a bit of a gray's head fused to the abdomen, and other parts of it were crystalline, in the way Anna was. It twitched faintly, floating weightlessly, neither touching the bottom, top, or sides. Ben couldn't stop drinking in the details. The way he saw the mass of flesh on the ground pump, and a bit of purple fluid mix in with the orange, seeping up through the fluid like a slow-moving bubble of dye. Then Ben shook his eyes away from the sight, only to see another mutated abomination. Floating in a different cylinder, the creature was as different from the first as a cat from a frog, yet they were both nightmares in their own right. There were dozens of them, spaced equidistant away from one another in an example of well-thought-out room design. Aside from the dim light of the mutation chambers, which is what Ben called them in his head, the room was unnaturally dark. Red had a serious look on her face and put her finger to her lips. Everybody nodded and walked slowly, carefully, into the chamber. Ben couldn't feel it, but his heart was racing, and he didn't know it, but his eyes were fully dilated. He was breathing with deep, quiet regularity, unconsciously avoiding getting too close to the mutation chambers. He hadn't known the monsters of the world knew about science and shit. It was a frankly terrifying thought, and he pointedly ignored the mutation chamber that had his own recently vacated corpse floating in it. Or at least he tried to. Honestly, though, he was a human being, and there were some things that anyone, anywhere would do. He started to veer off from the group, who immediately panicked, stumbled a bit, and followed him as he deviated from the plan. Ben stood in front of the huge apparatus, a bit of biotechnology more advanced than anything humans from his era had ever even come close to producing. The orange light cast him in the color of nightmares, a jack-o'-lantern on an evil Halloween night. It stained the white trim of his robe, and the cylinder was reflected in his eyes with a mirror's perfection, birthing the illusion of unnatural, glowing, slitted pupils. The entire body was puffy, swollen with fluid. The eyes had been ripped out, and the features mutilated. Bits of it were in the process of transforming, patches of skin turning hard and shiny, insectile. The wound, the hole from where his heart had been pulled, hung open and ragged, leaking dead man's blood that mixed with the orange fluid. Ben's mind was still like sub-zero ice, thoughts skidding across its hard stillness, unable to find purchase. It was the first time he'd seen a depiction of himself since coming to the world. He'd avoided mirrors, frightened of the possibility of seeing his new alien form, of the loss of his identity. "It has my face," Ben whispered, voice completely devoid of distress. "He looks just like me," Ben said, turning his head to look away, to look at the others. Ghost Ears was flying next to him, a horrified expression on his face. There wasn't a single one of them who wasn't affected. Shortbus had it bad, but Vivi had it the worst. The Aeon slug was, under his new clothes, turning transparent, all the color draining from his body, and his eyes were wide. "Come on, Vivi," Ben said, walking over to the Aeon slug, reaching up to pat him. "It's okay. I'm right here. I'm okay," he said, and smiled a big smile. "Your face," Vivi whispered, and Ben realized nobody had been looking at his corpse but staring at him. Ben blinked, not understanding at all. "I'm fine," Ben said, feeling a flutter of panic in his chest, struggling to keep his voice down. "See?" he said, and reached up to touch his face, then frowned when he felt something like quicksilver run down his finger, down his hand, down his arm, and drip against the floor. Ben blinked rapidly, then touched his face again, and more alien liquid came from his eyes. "Holy shit," Anna said, looking at the corpse, then at the silently weeping Prince. Ben's smile slipped, and he plastered it back on. It slipped again, and he unconsciously touched his stomach, the same spot he'd been hurt before. He put the smile back on and jerked his hand away from the spot, clenching his jaw. "No time for that," he said with a forced smile. Then he whapped his own corpse right from the mutation bay, and he said whap, like how he'd said it in Vivi's dungeon. Like it was a big joke. If he'd been in a more ornery mood, he would have stolen all the corpses. But even with his expanded utility pouch, "Ben!" Shortbus said, interrupting his racing thoughts, and hugged him, picking him up to do so and squeezing him tight. The shark opened his mouth like he was going to say something, then shut it, and just hugged Ben a little harder. "Put me down," Ben said, but only after a long moment. "No time for it. Later. Shortbus put him down. Ben wiped the strange tears from his eyes, and then looked up, straight up at the ceiling, probably to take a deep, dramatic, shuddering breath, the kind of breath that would fortify him to face the remainder of the Citadel. What actually happened was he looked up and saw the incredibly stealthy Spider-Woman monster hanging on the roof moments before she grinned evilly at him and started to drop. Ben screamed, and a new fight began. Chapter 36. What was a dungeon core, anyways? A divisive question, and one guaranteed to cause a massive scholarly disruption when asked in the College of Eternal Life. Some claimed they were a higher life form, superior. Others claimed they were a lower life form, inferior. Some claimed they weren't life forms at all, just machines without real intellect. Then the techno-liches and the magic-liches would fall into a familiar and friendly pattern of debate that ultimately went nowhere. An argument between two groups of liches could, due to their undead nature, last for weeks without interruption or break. The question of what a dungeon core was difficult to answer. The question of what a dungeon core did, that was well documented, well studied, and well agreed upon. Dungeon cores were, in an extremely loose, broad, and in no way complete terms, a water filtration plant for mana. It was well documented that dungeon cores existed on multiple planes of existence at once, all the way to and including the beyond, and that they pulled power straight into the world like big multidimensional pumps. They were a bit of technology that predated even the legendary Primordial War, and their original craftsmen were long forgotten to history. A world without dungeons was a world without magic, or worse, a world without clean magic. Because, like water, raw magic was full of sediment, pollutants, and living creatures. Just like raw water, it could be used, and just like raw water, using it was just asking for trouble. Unlike raw water, however, using raw magic was a surefire way to get completely infested with evil spirits, or mutate wildly, or just straight up summon some extremely unhappy monster from a different plane of existence. Dungeon cores pulled in raw mana through something like an enormous filter that blocked out anything too big or dangerous to be processed. The mana was then allowed to settle, allowing the pure magic to separate from all the gunk that had attached around it. The gunk was fashioned into physical matter, additional rooms and monsters for the dungeon, while the pure mana was then subjected to further processing. It was spun, twisted, shaken, vibrated, scrubbed, boiled, condensed, and finally frozen into pure mana gems which were consumed by the dungeon core. The core, after it had eaten, then gently released the wonderful and refreshing magic into its environment like the universe's most advanced humidifier. It was, in many ways, a microcosm of what the system was doing with the world, and indeed it was the basic technology from which the system had derived his magnum opus, his great masterpiece. The spider-human-centaur thing that was currently a half-second away from landing on Short Bus and eviscerating him didn't know any of this. It, or she, if we're being really fair to a murderous, evil mutation scientist monster, had been born in the Citadel of Horrors without the burden of backstory, which generally only gremlins were subjected to. She was happier for it and didn't question that she'd just popped into existence one day under the rule of a tyrant, the Citadel Fly, and that she would execute his will gleefully even at the cost of her own life. Still, despite her loyalty, she hadn't raised the alarm. She was upset she'd been told to remain and keep an eye on the mutation chambers, and so, when a group of tasty-looking morsels stumbled into her web, well, she did what spiders did. She attacked.